So communication skills is a big one, and just the basics of being able to have a functioning business life. I mean, as artists, we all, yeah, we love composing and being creative or in whatever art form that we do. But it's also, if we're doing it by ourselves and we are trying to make money from it, it's a business, and you have to know some things to run a business.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from honestypill.com. You're listening to episode 13 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to innovative musician entrepreneurs who've created new ways of performing, new ways of teaching, and new ways of serving their audiences. My guest today is composer and course creator Alexandra Gardner, who actually never intended to work in music at all. Growing up, Alex thought she was going to become an illustrator and draw covers for the New Yorker magazine, which actually would have been a really cool job. Becoming a composer never crossed her mind, and she even assumed that composers were just dead guys in powdered wigs. It wasn't until she enrolled in an electronic music class during her freshman year of college that she realized she could make her own sounds from scratch and combine them into anything she wanted. As a composer, she's been praised as highly lyrical and provocative of thought by the San Francisco Classical Voice, mesmerizing by the New York Times. Her compositions can also be heard around the world at venues like the Aspen Music Center, Beijing Modern Festival, the Grand Teton Music Festival, the Kennedy Center. Okay, just so many, you'll have to go and take a look at her website. We're going to dig into her compositional process, combining electronic and acoustic instruments, what it looks like for her to actually sit down and write a piece of music, and what it means to step out of your comfort zone and ask someone else to play a piece of music that you wrote. Alex is even going to weigh in on the topic of when it's okay to clap during a concert. And I don't know if you guys have been enjoying the occasional hoops I put my guests through, but I did it again. We're going to play a little quiz show style game to see if this composer can tell the difference between a real piece or one that I just made up on the spot. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Alexandra Gardner. So as a person who has not composed a single piece of music since my sophomore year of college, and believe me, you do not want to hear that, I'm so excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
So you went to school at the Peabody Institute, and you also went to Vassar College. Did you always just know that you were meant to be a composer? What made you decide to start writing your own music?
I did not always know at all. I didn't actually know until college. Before that, I grew up loving music, and I studied piano and I sang in choirs, and I was very involved in music. But it wasn't until I sort of on a whim signed up for an electronic music course in college that I thought that, wow, I can make my own sounds. I can compose my own music, combine things however I want. This is awesome. I have to do this. So that's how it started.
What was the electronic music course? What did you learn? Did you just study like George Crumb, or what was the school course about?
It was an introduction to electronic music, and it was very lab based in a studio. And I'm aging myself by saying, we were totally cutting tape and recording sounds from the world and making musique concrète and things like that, and just learning the basics of how to record and mix and manipulate, your own sounds. And I really loved the sort of visceral nature of it at the time. And it felt like, because when I was younger, I was, in addition to music, really into visual art. And I actually thought I would end up being a visual artist. That's what I initially wanted to do. And I went to college with that in mind. But when I got there, I was like, this feels like painting with sound. And I think I might enjoy that even more.
Do you still incorporate any visuals in your work, or is that a big part of the way you conceive of your composition? We're going to talk more about how you compose in a minute, but is that still part of how you view it?
I'm a very visual person, so it does play a part for sure. I definitely, when I'm working on pieces, I have, an image in mind, but I've also continued, I don't really draw or paint as much as I used to, but I am kind of a photography nerd. I used to be more, I don't have as much time now, but I love photography. And so my website uses a lot of my photography that I incorporate with my pieces. And so that's kind of a way that I continue that sort of visual art feel into my work.
So I'm going to date myself too, because I think we're probably around the same vintage, but this idea of becoming a photographer or becoming a composer, it's so much more accessible now as far as the tools, because, you want to become a photographer, you can go out with an iPhone 10, or what are they up to now, 11 maybe, and take some pretty darn good pictures, where back in the 70s, you were developing in a dark room with chemicals and things, and that just wasn't accessible. Same thing for the music. Cutting tape. I even think that the notion of what even is a tape, kids don't even know what a tape recorder is. What is your earliest musical memory, though? Okay, can you kind of pin it back to something that got you started on being a musician in general, not exactly as a composer, but what's your sort of framework for this life that you have?
That's a great question. I mean, one of my first musical memories is just listening to Kingston Trio records that my dad would play, and guitars and singing was, I love that. And also, I have an early memory of I really loved playing the recorder when I was little in music class. And actually, I kind of got nerdy about it and continued playing recorder for quite a long time. I still have a tenor recorder from when I was a teenager that I can't totally reach C on because my hands never got really big.
Alex, just the fact that you know that it's a tenor recorder and not just a recorder means you're a super geek, and that's why I love you so much. So, yeah, I actually learned the recorder too. Piano and recorder were just sort of basic things that we all started out doing when we were in school. I think that's a little bit different now too, where kids are starting violin or other instruments, if they're studying instruments at all. That's going to be a topic I want to circle back on in a bit, because music being part of our society and part of our education has changed so much in the past decades that now, as a composer, getting that voice out to people is more challenging, I think, because it's just this type of music is not so woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. So I'd actually love to talk a little bit about your musical voice. When you hear that someone is an orchestral clarinet player or an opera singer, you can kind of guess, I probably know what you do, what you sound like. But when someone says, I'm a composer, that could mean just about anything. So how would you describe your musical language or style?
Ooh, that's a great question. It's always the hardest one. You're right. When you say you're a composer, that could literally mean anything. When I'm on an airplane, the person sitting next to me will say, "Oh, do you write music like Yanni?" or something like that, which is always fun
Oh, wow.
to talk about.
That's a tough one to respond to.
I usually say that I write music for instruments that are in an orchestra, and I often combine them with electronic music. So that's kind of the basic thing that I start with, and then we go from there.
Can I read a quick quote about your music that I just love? The music of composer Alexandra Gardner is thrilling audiences and performers alike with a clear, expressive sound and a flair for the imaginative and unexpected. She composes for a variety of instrumentation, often mixing acoustic instruments with electronics, blending lyricism, rhythmic exploration, textural constructions, and a love of sonic storytelling. So you mentioned this a little bit ago about blending electronics and acoustic instruments, but this started for you in college. That's when you first started writing this way.
That's true. Yeah. And now I have like a long series of pieces for instance, solo instrument with electronics that I've been doing for 20 years now. They keep going, and yeah, that's something I really love doing. I started kind of by accident when I was living in Spain, and the university that I was working in said, "Oh, there's a guitarist coming in. Do you want to write a piece for guitar and electronics for him?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, whatever. That'd be great." And I did that. And then they said, "That worked out great. There's a bass clarinetist coming. You want to do a bass clarinet and electronics piece?" And I said, "Of course I do." And then, people started asking for them more and more, and they would get played more and more. So I just kept writing for the different instruments and people who would ask. And now there's like 14 or 15 of them.
We still don't really blend electronics and orchestral music as often as not, though, right? What I'm curious about is, do you find it's harder to get music programmed now when you're blending electronics, or are more organizations, I'm thinking mostly of orchestras, reaching out and programming that kind of music? Because I know at the LA Phil, we do a lot of experimentation, and there is a lot of electronics. I love it when I see a composer on stage with a laptop. I'm like, ooh, something different is going to happen.
Yeah, I love it too. I wish there were more. I'm glad that there are orchestras that are working to make that a more common occurrence. Yeah, hopefully that there will be more and more going forward, because it's doable now. It used to be a lot more complicated, I think, but now that technology has become so condensed and you can really have so much happening just like you said, in a laptop and with some speakers. And more we understand as composers and also as orchestras and sound people and everything, how to make that work for an audience. I hope that there will be more going forward.
So I'm going to ask you this question because I'm dying to know what goes on inside composers' minds when they're conceiving. And I'm sure it's different for everybody. That's like asking what goes through a painter's mind. I don't know. It's probably different. But when I was playing John Adams' composition, The Gospel According to the Other Mary, which is an epic piece of music, it may be one of my favorite pieces I've ever played of his, or maybe even of anyone's. How does a person just organize all of the data, the structure, the arc? Do you just map that out on paper? Is it all computer? Is it like, what does sitting down to write something like that or anything actually look like for you?
Well, I think you're right that it's different for every person, but for me, I think of it like probably like an architect. I do map things out beforehand and kind of think about how I want different instruments to speak to each other and interact, like a combination of an architectural plan and a play. Like how are all of these characters going to work together to get through this journey to some particular end? And a lot of times when I'm working, that journey will change and my plans will maybe be moot that I started out with, but I always like to start with a skeleton in mind of like how this is going to go and then work from there. It becomes more intuitive after that, but I really like to have a structure in place that I can start from.
And does technology play a big part of that?
Yes and no. In the beginning, I generally start out with sort of pen and paper, pencil and paper. And I start out a lot by drawing and sometimes writing words to sort of cement my ideas and get them down quickly before I write any notes at all. So I do a lot of like brainstorming on paper and I do some writing on paper to sort of figure out maybe a harmonic scheme for a section of a piece. I'll write that down on paper and, mess around on the piano and figure out what I want. But fairly quickly after that, I start moving to the computer.
So this is awesome because I'm learning about the mind and how composers' minds work, especially when I sit down and it's obvious to me when someone has written something at the computer without really understanding the tendencies of the instrument. While I think it's great that composers use technology, because again, like I just talked about with John Adams, I don't understand how you can hold that in your head. You need some sort of framework. But there's a line where you have to be careful you don't cross over into just using your motivic idea and assuming that any instrument can play it. How do you deal with those challenges? I mean, do you have to learn how to play every single instrument?
That's a great question. It probably wouldn't hurt if you did, but and I know that a lot of music education people can play every instrument a little bit. My solution for this has always been spending time with the people who do play the instruments that I don't play and asking them a lot of questions and asking them to play things that I've written to see how they sound and doing lots and lots of score study and research as well. But the best thing is the like personal contact with a trumpet player, for instance, to figure out how to do that thing effectively, whatever that thing may be, and putting that together. There've been other instruments that I've kind of found intimidating at various times in my life. Like, for instance, acoustic guitar was very hard the first time I wrote for it, but I spent a lot of time with the guitarist working on it. That was super helpful. And I know that I would never been able to write well for it without doing that. Same for organ, instruments like that just you have to sit with the person and listen to it and be surrounded in that sound world for a while to figure out and look at physically how they play it.
Well, this is the beauty of musicians getting to work with living composers, is that we can actually go up and ask, what did you mean by this here? I mean, some of the notation is obviously standard, but as you start to push the envelope, one of the things that seems to confuse composers with trumpet is the notation for when we use a harmon mute, and that's the wah-wah mute. That's like the Peanuts teacher sound, right? Whether it's closed or open, and whether the stem is in or out, or how much. That seems to boggle the minds of composers, and it's great when you can go up and ask them. You actually just reminded me of a story. Speaking of composers being in tune with the musicians that they're writing for, our principal trumpet in the LA Phil, Tom Hooton, is just a phenomenal musician and an incredible technician on the trumpet. He can do things on the trumpet most people cannot do. And one day he was on stage warming up with this really insane arpeggiated triple tonguing pattern moving down chromatically, which none of us can play. We were just like, how are you doing that? And out of the corner of my eye, sprinting, and I mean literally sprinting across the stage comes Andrew Norman with a pen and paper in his hand. It's like, what did you just play? And we were like, don't don't do that, because nobody else but this guy can play it. But it is interesting that his radar, as I assume many composers are, is always open to hearing new sounds or new techniques that they can incorporate in their work.
Absolutely. I definitely would have probably been sprinting across the stage also. That's true. I mean, one of the things that I love about working with musicians is, when they are rehearsing a piece or something and say, hey, I could do it, this particular phrase, one of these three ways, what do you like better? And you're like, that's amazing to be able to hear that. I do know what I want, but a lot of times something will come out that is like more interesting, or that, is more in the voice of the musician, that sort of adds to the piece. And I really love that aspect of collaboration with live performers.
Do you ever specifically write for an individual, or is it you're writing for the instrument and maybe incorporating things that you know about?
If I know that I'm writing for an individual, I will usually write mostly with them in mind and find out, what do they like to do? What are their, superpowers? What do they not like to do? Things like that. So if I don't know, then I, if I don't know, I don't know.
Well, I was thinking of, there are certain pieces when orchestras play them where you just turn around and think, what on earth possessed the composer to put that in that part? For example, Britain, Peter Grimes, the four interludes, the third trumpet part is pretty quiet down there. And all of a sudden he like rips this 2-octave super high note thing that comes out. And you're like, what the heck? Like, why on earth would he put that? And clearly there's some backstory there about that third trumpet. And maybe the composer didn't like him very much and wanted to get him fired. So he figured to give him something really hard. Or maybe that was his specialty. And you're like, I got to showcase this poor third trumpet who never gets to play high notes. I don't know. Look, going back to something you said a minute ago, Alex, about architecture. Why do we keep calling it classical music? Because we don't do that for buildings, right? We definitely don't call like a building like Walt Disney Concert Hall classical, yet music that's played inside of it, we call it classical music. That's always sort of puzzled me as to why we continue to use that sort of misnomer. Any thoughts on that?
I wish I had an answer. I really wish I did. I mean, a lot of the music community that I'm a part of call music that is created and played by people right now new music, and I'm not sure that works either. But I think that a new name would be great. I'm not sure what that would look like, but
I don't ask just to be academic. There's a reason I ask it, and it is because labeling it classical music it tends to make it more distant, more confusing, less accessible. Where if we just called it music, people would be like, oh, I like music. I've been listening to music my whole life. Where if it's classical music, suddenly there's this wall that comes up. And I think if you want to talk about walls and making people scared to access it, calling it new music is even worse for most communities, because, oh, that's going to be something really strange that I don't understand and can't comprehend. So I think it's worth investigating this way we talk about what we're doing, so we can invite more people to come in and enjoy it.
I agree. Both of those terms do put up so many boundaries and create so many assumptions that, yeah, they're not helpful.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this interview. I just want to hop in here really quick and let you know, if you are a musician who is ready to take the leap and bring your music and your skills and your knowledge to a whole new audience in a whole new way, my 6-month group coaching program, the Online Business Accelerator, launches on February 15th, 2021. There are limited spots available, application only, but I'm inviting you, my listeners, to hop on a free 30-minute discovery call with me, no obligation, right now. Go to honestypill.com, check out the Online Business Accelerator page, and click on any of the buttons there to get to my schedule link. Okay, it sounds like the orchestra's done tuning. I got to get out of here. Hope you enjoyed the rest of this episode. So at the LA Phil, I've noticed a distinct trend in new works getting larger and larger with enormous orchestration, tons of percussion. I think of composers like Esa-Pekka Salonen or Thomas Addis, and these orchestral forces that they've been writing for. Do you think the pandemic is going to have any impact on the orchestration composers are going to be writing for or thinking about writing for, due to the fact that we just can't get that many musicians on stage for the foreseeable future?
I can't imagine that it wouldn't have an effect. I think it will. And I think it, there's no way to know, but it could go in two different directions. First of all, I think that due to necessity, obviously we have to be thinking about smaller orchestration right now and maybe for quite a while in the future. But I have a feeling that eventually there will be a backlash and everything will be absolutely huge, huger than ever, because that's what humans do. We've been, cramped up for a while, and depending on how much longer we're cramped up, I think everyone's gonna bust out in a big way whenever they're able to.
There will be a lot of Mahler 8 Symphony of 1,000 performances getting booked. Even if we can't afford them or can't play them, we're going to be making those things happen. So this is a little bit out there of a woo-woo question or kumbaya style question, but can anybody be a composer? Do we all have something inside of us, some piece of music or composition that can be written down or should be written down? Or is it just something that certain people can do?
I will join you in the woo zone and say that I think that everyone is creative. And I think that, music is something that can be expressed by anyone and everyone. That's something that I feel really strongly about. I really want to dispel the idea of the composer as genius myth, that this romantic era thing that is just not healthy. And I think it's not great. And we're in 2021, and I spend a lot of time talking to and working with non-musicians and non-traditional musicians, meaning adults or people who've been away from music for a long time and are coming back. And, it's amazing to see them blossom when they realize, like, I can do this too. This is great. I can make music. Awesome. As a high school student that I worked with recently said, I thought that composing was supposed to be for prodigies. I didn't realize that it was something that you could just sit down and do. And it is something you can just sit down and do.
That's awesome. If you've got the right direction, because I don't know where to even start. My job in the orchestra is to execute and interpret as well as I can the music that comes across my stand. Spoiler alert, it's actually not a very creative job, what I do. And I like executing and I like details. So that's why I think I do well in this job. But it is not a very creative endeavor being an orchestral musician. Your job as a composer is to literally design the sound that is going to be coming out of my instrument. Are there fears around imposter syndrome, or what if the musicians hate it or the audience doesn't like it? Because at the end of the day, if a composition is a huge success and people jump to their feet, or if it's met with crickets and totally flops, it's usually the composer who's in the spotlight.
That is true. And yes, I think there are, fears and imposter syndrome are very, very common. I would be surprised if there were people who didn't have any at all. It's a very real thing, which I know for myself, I try not to worry about while I'm working, because it doesn't help the music. So I do what I can, as I think I said before, is, if I'm unsure about a particular instrument, I make sure that I become sure of it by working with people who play it and through lots of study and experimentation. Without fear, that's the most happy place, I think, for a composer, is designing those sounds that come out of your instruments. I mean, that's what we do. It's the best.
Do you often get a chance to get a piece played and then go and rework it and bring it back? Or is it pretty much by the time it hits the stage, it's baked in, you're done?
I've had both situations. I really like being able to hear a piece in rehearsal and possibly have time to revise. There are usually little things that I want to tweak if I can before a premiere performance or something. Sometimes that's not possible, and that's fine. But I'm definitely like a chronic tweaker. So it's nice to be able to hear things and work with the musicians and make sure that everything is the way we all want it before a performance. But if it's not, sometimes I do go back and fix things. If I feel really strongly that something could be better, then I'm going to make it better.
Okay, speaking of chronic tweaking, this question is going to come to us from the Department of Classical Music clapping etiquette, okay? I was thinking of those moments in a world premiere, and we do a lot of those at the LA Phil, where, the audience obviously doesn't know where the piece is over. But if there's a big cadence or a cymbal crash or something, they just start clapping, right? Because they think it's over. I'm thinking, for example, of the end of the third movement of Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6. It just ends with a big bang, and people cannot help themselves but start clapping. In fact, when we play that piece, we're always wondering what kind of audience we're going to have. Are they super reserved and do they know the piece, or are they a bunch of kids and they're having a great time? So I was checking out your commission from the Seattle Symphony titled Just Say Yes, which is a super grooving, almost like rock inspired collaboration with longtime Yes drummer Alan White. And I noticed there was one of these moments where there's this huge explosion of sound and the audience just breaks out into applause. What do composers want us to do in those situations? Do you want us to clap when we like something? Do you want us to wait? And do you ever go back and consider rewriting those moments, like stick a trombone solo in there so people know it's not over?
That's so funny. I don't know how. I can only speak for myself in this regard, but if people want to clap, let them clap. Like, that's great. In that particular piece, I know what part you're talking about, and it's after Alan's like epic drum cadenza. And I actually structured the piece because I knew that there was no way people were not going to clap after he plays for like 2 minutes on his glass drum set, being ridiculously awesome. And of course they did. And, so I fixed it so that clapping wouldn't obscure anything super, super important that was happening. And yeah, I think if people want to clap, they should clap.
I love that attitude. I also agree. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. I've literally said that on this podcast before. And I think that it speaks to the changing attitude around serious classical music. And I wonder if Tchaikovsky would have rewritten, because I'm sure it annoyed him, or maybe it didn't. I don't know. I can't speak for Tchaikovsky, but I think that it's great. If you're happy and you like something, show it, especially in a piece like Just Say Yes, which is awesome. So I have to ask this too, because this is something that all orchestral musicians wonder about. And it has to do with taking a bow. I've always wondered what it was like at the end of a premiere to have the conductor do that thing where they turn around and they look out in the hall and they invite you to come up on stage while everyone is standing up cheering for you. Do you have a particular memory of that experience that you can share?
It's so fun to hear what you wonder about. I love these questions.
We have a lot of free time in the trumpet section too, so we think about these things.
I love it. Yes, I do have a particular memory, and I think it's definitely at my first big orchestra performance. That moment is incredibly terrifying because, well, as a woman, I'm probably wearing heels and I have to walk up onto the stage and shake everybody's hand in the order that you shake everybody's hand and not fall on my face, and just making sure that works out, I found very stressful at the time, and subsequently still kind of stressful. So it's like amazing and terrifying.
I'd love to switch gears a little bit. In music school, they don't teach you how to go out and get a commission or get somebody to pay you to write music. And I'd love to talk about the business side of being a composer a little bit. What do you wish they taught composers in music school now that they just haven't been teaching?
Wow, so many things. I wish they taught composers overall better communication skills, like how to use their words effectively. There are so many composers who don't like writing program notes or don't like talking about themselves and what they do, or don't know what to say, that I think it really holds them up in their careers. So communication skills is a big one, and just the basics of being able to have a functioning business life. I mean, as artists, we love composing and being creative, or in whatever art form that we do. But it's also, if we're doing it by ourselves and we are trying to make money from it, it's a business, and you have to know some things to run a business, and nobody teaches you that. And in music school, I think a lot of the entrepreneurial programs that they have now are really geared more for performers, and composers have kind of different needs. So it doesn't touch on a lot of composery stuff that might be helpful.
What kind of needs do composers have that are different?
Like how to make a contract with somebody who wants to commission you, how to negotiate that, how to manage a rehearsal of your music as a composer, things like that, how to organize a concert of your music.
That idea of how to manage a rehearsal has never crossed my mind in this context until just now. But thinking back on watching composers in a rehearsal with orchestras that I've worked with, it really varies a lot. Some of them are right there with the score, whispering to the conductor. Some of them are talking directly to the musicians. Some of them are sitting in the back of the hall and they just give us a thumbs up after we read through it. So I guess it's probably depends on the piece, but how they engage with us makes a difference with how the musicians engage with the music. I like it when a composer comes up and sits down next to me and says, what I was thinking right here was, and even better is asking the question, how's that work for you? Did I get that? That's an amazing thing. If a composer asks my opinion on something, I'm sold. And, I'm always going to pour myself into any work that's in front of me, but it's nice to have that connection.
Yeah, and that's part of also another aspect of the communication skills, not all about what's on the page exactly. There's humans playing your music. Composers need people to play their music. You are people, and so have to engage with them as such and find out, does this thing work for you? Is there something that could be different? Would you be happier with X, Y, or Z? Or maybe I would be happier if you did X, Y, or Z. Just the back and forth of that is really important. And a lot of people, that's not really taught. And for composers anyway, I mean, you as a musician, you have rehearsals all the time. And maybe you play chamber music, and that's a different kind of rehearsal setting. But as a composer, we're not always in on it. So there's not a lot of learning around how to communicate in that way.
It's funny. This probably isn't worth teaching in a course, but it's also notable how musicians talk to composers during a rehearsal. Because there's always that question where you're like staring at this accidental and thinking, I feel like I understand this person's musical language, and that accidental just is grinding right there. Did they mean it? Or is it an accident? And you hate to ask, like, excuse me, did you mean to write that? Because you don't want to be offensive. But on the other hand, you want to get it right. So maybe we have to have a joint class teaching those things. This go out and create a career stuff just isn't taught in music school. That goes for auditions. It goes for performers. It goes for composers, managers. It is just not taught, which has always sort of boggled my mind. But luckily, there are musicians and musician entrepreneurs like you creating resources for people, especially composers who want to do just that. Can you talk a little bit about your 6-month composition and professional development course called Scale Up? Super curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a new course that I've just developed that will be starting in January, and it's intended for a small group of composers to get real world experience writing a piece for an ensemble that will be a sort of collaborative endeavor between them and the ensemble, and also to sort of learn the tools that composers need in their toolbox to move forward in their careers with confidence and sort of have a plan in place to do what they want to do. So we're going to write music and also get a real world picture of how to manage your music in the world, and hear from some guest experts and everything, backstage views of different parts of the music industry and what music making looks like for them.
What's been the hardest thing about running your business?
The hardest thing? Well, it's both the hardest and the best thing, which is that it's 100% up to me to do all the things. I love being my own boss, and that's why I wanted to do it in the first place. And also, it's up to me, to deliver all the things and respond and make all this stuff happen.
There's a great quote from one of Jen Sincero's books. I think it's You Are a Badass, where she says, "The good thing about running your own business is you call the shots, you make the decisions, it's your neck on the line. The bad thing about running a business is you call the shots, you make all the decisions, is your neck on the line." What's gotten easier over time?
I think just feeling comfortable in my own skin as an artist and business owner, and sort of having a grip on what I need to do to make things work, and feeling comfortable asking for help if I feel like I need it.
You just got done launching this program too, didn't you? Or is it happening right now? I kind of lost track of your dates.
No, I just finished launching it.
You're awake enough to have a conversation with me. That's impressive, because launches can be like running a marathon. They're exhausting. How did this launch go for you?
It went really, really well. And it was exhausting, like a marathon. I think if I had realized how much I might have thought harder about whether I wanted to do it, it was intense. But it went incredibly well. I did a 3-day free series of something that I call Composer Street Smarts, an hour a day focused on a different topic that are sort of foundational for a composer's business life. So I did a little session on royalties, and then a session on composer websites, and another on self-publishing.
royalties and self-publishing. There's so many legalese things here that you have to know about too. I mean, this is amazing that you're putting together a resource that's helping people navigate all of that, because again, it probably changes too, right? As time goes by, different rights, things expire. I don't even know how any of that works, but I imagine that it's critical to understand that if you're going to be publishing music.
Yeah, it is. It does change, and also, nobody talks about how to do the basic parts of it very much. So, it's kind of a toss-up as to whether a composer gets that information or not. So I really wanted to make it more accessible to a larger group of people and sort of present basic information and start to sort of go into deeper places, identify areas where you could study more if you're interested in this or that. I think it's really important to give composers some extra information that they might not have in order to set up their lives. I mean, it's administrative stuff. It's not like the super fun part of being a composer, and yet it's so important.
Yeah, I think the dream of just sort of waltzing around playing concertos throughout Europe or something is very romantic, but there's a lot of back end stuff that happens to support a solo career or an orchestral career or a teaching career or all these types of things. So if you had unlimited resources, any orchestra, any connection, any conductor, any ensemble, what would you be creating? What would you be creating? Some sort of a festival, or what would that look like for you?
I have always wanted to compose music for a ballet. I used to write a lot of music for modern dance, so I really love doing that. And I would love to do a much larger work that is ballet plus multimedia, something that involves visuals and movement and as well as music. So that's kind of a bucket list item for me.
Love it. And the sky's the limit, right? As far as incorporating electronics and media and doing new things. My wife tells a story from the Eastman School of Music. Sam Adler was trying to tell his students to quit trying to shock audiences and by doing things just for the pure shock value. He said, everything's been done before. I mean, you could stand on your head on a piano bench and spit chiclets to the audience and they wouldn't bat an eyelash. That's a direct quote from Sam Adler. And I don't know if that's actually true, because there's been some things going on in my world that you can't even believe these pieces. And I'll say this, let me set this up this way. Classical music kind of has a reputation for being really stodgy and straight-laced, but there are a lot of pieces out there that really push the boundaries in some pretty unbelievable ways. In fact, it's hard to know if certain compositions are even real when you hear their descriptions. And on that note, Alex, I was thinking, since you're a composer, you might be up for a short quiz style, game show style, where I can name or describe a composition, and you have to tell me if it's a real piece that was actually performed or if I made it up. Would you be up for that?
That sounds awesome. Let's try.
Okay. So I get a short handful of these. All right, you can tell me if this is real or I made it up.
Okay.
Clocking in at 2 hours and 30 minutes long, this piece exists only as a collection of random chunks of over 200 European operas, all played at the exact same time. Real piece or made up?
Real.
That's correct. That is John Cage Europeras 1 and 2, and it was recently performed by the LA Phil, where we literally were assigned timestamps for snippets of over 200 operas, but not actually like the big moments. There were literally random pieces. Could be like a dotted quarter note and a rest. And it was also combined with random props, costumes, arias, and stage placements, lighting, backdrops, all completely random, but set to a timer. It was insane. I loved it. Actually, it was sort of meditative after 2.5 hours. And there'd be a flute player, playing something super gentle. And then my part was some like triple forte, trumpet crushing thing that I would just have to stomp right on the other musicians. All right. I loved it, actually. Does it sound like I loved it? I think it does.
I think you loved it.
I loved it.
That's
okay.
it.
Next piece. This is number 2. This piece involves throwing watermelons off the roof of a building, and it's called Sonata for Melons and Gravity.
That could absolutely be real. I feel like it's real.
You're right. That is real. Also performed by the LA Phil. It's written by Ken Friedman. And if you could imagine the aroma of probably about 100 watermelons in a giant box that had been smashed, it was epic. Grand Avenue smelled like some sort of cocktail was being made. Okay, number 3. This piece is a piece that can only be performed by 2 people. It's unaccompanied, and it's actually really dangerous. And it's titled Double Concerto for Violin and Hatchet.
Yeah, probably real.
This one is false.
Oh.
But the piece was actually conceived by one of my composing friends in college, but it was never actually performed because he couldn't get hold of a hatchet, which is probably a really good thing. So I guess you might be. I'm going to give you that one. So technically, it was a real piece, even though it never got performed. All right, a couple more. You okay? You're hanging in?
Yeah, I'm good. Let's do it.
Are you getting some ideas here? Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
This next piece requires 10 players to take the stage, each in charge of 10 wind-up metronomes. All 100 metronomes are wound to their limit and then set off and allowed to tick away until they have completely wound themselves down.
Totally real.
Totally real. Do you know the piece?
I do. I've heard it.
It's by Ligeti.
Yes.
It's got a very deceptive title. It's called Poème symphonique, which is really pretty. And then these people march out with metronomes. Okay, good. You got that one. Okay, just a couple more. You're doing great. This piece instructs a performer to bang their head against a wall, and it is called Wall Piece for Orchestra.
Tempting. Maybe not real.
This is real. It was written by none other than Yoko Ono in 1962. And
of course it was.
Yeah, of course, Yoko Ono wrote that piece. And it was actually played by the first associate concertmaster of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Nathan Cole, who actually had to smack his head on the wall of Waltz to the Concert Hall. It was epic. It was incredible. Okay,
awesome.
Two more.
Okay.
This piece requires a performer to unbox a violin, play a short solo piece, and then smash the violin to pieces.
Maybe real.
Good for you. That also is real and was actually paired with a Yoko Ono piece. It's called One for Solo Violin by Nam June Paik. And Nathan actually played that piece, smashed the violin to pieces, and then went and smacked his head on the wall. This is just like a Tuesday night at the LA Phil. This is how we roll.
You have a cool job.
Okay, here's your last one. This is a big one. This piece involves a performer's making a salad on stage and then serving it to the audience. It's called Make a Salad.
Probably real.
It's totally real.
Totally real.
Written by Allison Knowles as part of the Fluxus concert series, I think, which is back in the 60s or 70s. And again, we played this at the LA Phil a couple seasons ago. It was amazing. Is it a good thing, or what does it mean that the LA Phil has basically performed all of these pieces? I don't know. I'm just going to throw that out there.
It's great. It's great. These are pieces that should be performed. Maybe not the hatchet one, but yeah.
I think it's important that we realize, and maybe the reason I had you suffer through that game, and thank you for doing that, by the way, is classical music is not serious. And that's what maybe the whole point of this interview with you is to sort of draw that out and highlight we can be creative and we can do whatever we want to do. It doesn't have to be so stodgy and elitist. And I think if we move further away from that in a big way, then maybe someone coming in for a Mozart symphony won't seem that crazy because they've at least had experience of participating in the concert hall experience, and engaging with what the whole process looks like. So what do you've got coming up, Alex? What else should we know about?
What else is coming up in a pandemic? Well, so this course is happening. I am currently working on a new piece for flute, harp, and percussion that will be happening in the spring, though I don't know when yet. And also a work for oboe and electronic.
Is most of the stuff you're working on right now just all being rehearsed or talked about or workshopped through online Zoom rooms, or how is that happening?
Yeah, it's being, people, since everything is kind of up in the air, there are potential performances that may be virtual or may be real in the spring and summer coming up. So, we'll see. It's a little hard to know, but I know that I am still making them. So they will happen in one, format or the other.
Amazing.
Which I'm happy for,
It's amazing. We'll adapt and we'll get back on stage at some point. Where can our listeners connect with you online and learn more about all the stuff you're up to, Alex?
Probably the best place is my website, which is alexandragardner.net, where I keep all my things, all my music and work and stuff.
Awesome. Alex, thank you for playing my insane game. Thank you for being here. And maybe when the pandemic wraps up, we can, do a piece about making a salad or maybe brewing some beer. That'd be even better. Call me up. I'll be the first person on stage.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Big thanks to Alexandra for sitting down with us on the show today. And go check out her website, listen to her music, and get ready to throw some watermelons off her roof because her music is probably coming to an orchestra soon near you. Okay, that's it for me today. This has been the Honesty Pill Podcast, episode 13. And a quick reminder that the doors to the Online Business Accelerator 6-month training program are now open. Go to honestypill.com for more information. Click that button to schedule a free 30-minute discovery call with me right now, and let's hop on the phone. Figure out what your musical future is going to look like and if this program is right for you. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. See you next time.